Emotionally healthy people crave this way more than sex. We're going to dive into this conversation today. Whether you're a man or woman, there's a big difference in the dating marketplace. If you're actually connecting with a person who has a relatively high emotional maturity versus those that have weak emotional maturity, weak relationship skills, or that are emotionally constipated or unavailable. And there's a big difference that we're going to differentiate also between those who are actually doing some work healing themselves versus those that have done little or no work, are object to doing any healing work. And I think it's radically important to understand this. And since my audience is midlife is after baby making years and before retirement. So if you're in the ages of 42 to 69, that's the predominant audience I speak to, and why this is so significantly different than those men or women in their 20s and 30s is oftentimes they are in a relationship to make babies and raise a family. Let me repeat this: make babies and raise a family. And they might have some different obstacles to attend to versus those of us in midlife. And we're going to dive into those obstacles as well. So for this conversation, I think it's important to know the three types of people who are actively in the dating marketplace, the three types of people that are actively in the dating marketplace. Please forgive this graph. And by the way, this is not a fact, it's merely an opinion. But I roughly say 20% of the populations are users. They seek short-term game. They're love bombers. They're players. They're gold diggers. They're entitled people. They're only in it for themselves. And while over here I say 20% of the population are grower builders, they seek long-term connection. They are emotionally healthy. They have their act together. The vast majority, roughly maybe about 60%, and again, this is not a fact, it's merely an opinion, are what I call spenders. And the reason why they're called spenders is they'll spend time with you. They want companionship. They want connection. They want that physical intimacy. But maybe their life is in chaos. Maybe they're unhealed from their childhood wounds or adult traumas. Maybe they're going through a significant divorce. They're basically not capable of being in a serious relationship. And I know many of you men and women out there watching this have experienced that person I call a spender. And again, they're spending time with you. You eventually become a placeholder in their life. You become a placeholder in their life. Listen, most people are good people. They don't intentionally want to hurt someone. We all, human beings, all crave some level of safety, emotional connection, of love. We want to feel safe with a partner. But for those who haven't done the inner work, the healing work, and again, I talk about childhood wounds and adult traumas. If you're not familiar with the book, The Hoffman Process, I highly recommend reading this so you can understand your own fears, insecurities, negative patterns, limiting beliefs. By the way, all the books I recommend are listed below. How your judgments might affect relationships, how you might be sabotaging relationships based on a childhood wound. I highly recommend reading this book. And then a follow-up to this would also be to understand your love attachment style. If you're not familiar with the book, Wired for Love by Dr. Stan Tack, and I highly recommend understanding how you might be choosing a partner from an insecure place. There's basically two types of love attachment styles. There's secure and insecure. Now, here's the fascinating thing about secures. Most people that, or let me reframe that. This is the fascinating thing about insecure people. And within insecure, there's something known as anxious, preoccupied, fearful avoidant, and dismissive avoidant. That's in the insecure category. What's fascinating about most human beings, they'll take the test online and they all come out, all the wounded people, all the insecure people, all seem to be secure. It fascinates me how we human beings gaslight ourselves. We're not really honest with ourselves on a really granular emotional level. Now, I will say most of these tests are rather simplistic. And because of that, it really doesn't go into the granular spaces within your past relationships, those periods of times where you might feel insecure, where you might pull away. And so Understanding this helps, and certainly healing these modalities within yourself actually better prepares you for a healthy relationship. And I'm going to talk about what men and women crave more than physical intimacy. Well, and I will say this, sex is an important part of the dating process because, or let me reframe that, the whole part of the relationship process, because listen, you have relationships with people in your life. You have family members, you have friends, you have coworkers. But the one significant difference is that when you're in a romantic relationship, it usually includes sex. So that's an important part of the relationship. And we're going to talk about, in the next few months, we're going to talk a lot about the importance of sex in a relationship. So here's why midlife is so radically different than those in their 20s and 30s. You see, people in their 20s and 30s are oftentimes come to the table as a blank sheet of paper. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have childhood wounds, but they don't necessarily have a lot of luggage. I know it's called baggage, but I prefer to call it luggage. And some people, when they're traveling in their life, their luggage can fit in the overhead compartment on the airplane. And some people need 6 sky caps to put it on the plane. There are certainly things like distance that is an obstacle in the early stages of dating. These days, most people aren't meeting people right in their own backyard. Distance, proximity plays a factor. It can be an obstacle into building a deeper connection with another human being. Certainly those in midlife, some people are empty nesters, some people are still raising children. This can be a complication because your children are a big part of your life or a big part of someone else's life. And it could directly affect, it could be an obstacle in building a closer relationship with another person. Certainly lifestyle differences. I've noticed that, please forgive me, but in the dating marketplace as a single man, I see a lot of women who are hyper focused on physical activities. They're skiing, they're mountain biking, they're jumping out of airplanes, they're climbing mountains. And I'm like, that's not who I am. Our lives and the way I curate my life might be completely different the way someone else curates their life. And a lot of times lifestyle differences becomes a block to connecting. One of the most important blocks, and it's actually what we're going to dive in today, is a mismatch in love languages. And guess what? There's a lot more new information about love languages that goes far beyond what Gary Chapman talked about in his 5 love languages. Now, today, religion and politics can play a big role in differences in relationships. I would venture to say, at least here in the United States, someone who's radically conservative is probably not going to get along with someone who's radically liberal. And I think it's naive to suggest that politics and/or our spiritual connection, our religion certainly, can play a huge factor in connecting at a deep heart-centered level. Certainly health differences. I know here in Southern California, we tend to be a little bit more health conscious than other parts of the country. But I've spoken to women and men where health differences was the deal breaker. We call sometimes things the ick, but we're talking about a value difference when it comes to health, and that can play a huge role. And then earlier I talked about physical and sexual type. Everybody has their own sexual preferences, and we humans oftentimes naively go into the dating experience or go into sex just expecting that the man is going to be James Bond and he's going to be the most proficient lover on the planet. And certainly men, and by the way, in midlife, we are dealing with a lot of shame when it comes to our physical body and certainly our sexual capacity to be in relationship. These are some of the big obstacles we deal with. Certainly someone's individual passions in life can be a factor. And as I said earlier, emotional health and emotional readiness plays a huge role into whether or not two people are actually going to find a space of wanting something more than that physical intimacy. And lastly, their motives, desires, and vision. Do they have a short-term mating strategy or a long-term mating strategy? I would venture to say most men operate with a short-term strategy. Women oftentimes also operate from a short-term strategy, but in the back of their mind, they've been conditioned to desire commitment and safety. But believe it or not, the way they actually date, from what I've observed, is a very short-term strategy. And this is why in the dating marketplace, it's such chaos. This is one of the reasons why, at least here in the United States, we have over 100 million singles. You believe this? With one third of the population is single. One third of the population is probably doesn't, well, I don't know what the percentage of young people, but certainly we have a significant population of people that are not mated with one another for a variety of different reasons. And I will tell you, it's because many of them date from a short-term mating strategy. Sadly, this is where a lot of you ladies get hung up. You're seeking that man that will climb to the highest room of the tallest tower through romance and entertainment, and not the emotional maturity that you should be hyper-focused on, in my opinion, vetting for emotional maturity more so than being entertained or romanced in a relationship. So today we're going to explore some new content concerning what men and women crave more than sex in a relationship. And while physical connection is important, we're going to touch upon that. I'm actually going to share with you something I became aware of last year, known as the 7 love languages. The 7 love languages. I highly recommend Googling this right now. This is actually... it's kind of taking the principles from Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, and expanding and adding new things. Expanding and adding new things, because ultimately, an emotionally healthy person craves all 7 of these things. Let me repeat that. They crave all 7. This is the delusion let me reframe that. The misconception of the 5 love languages is some people only speak in one love language, and one person speaks in one love language and another person speaks another love language, and they're not connecting at that heart-centered level. They're not connecting at that heart-centered level. So I invite you to explore these for yourself and ask yourself, can you speak all of these love languages? Because this is what emotionally healthy men and women crave more than sex. And listen, write these down and see if this fits your narrative. Okay, the first one is activities. I even shared this before. Hobbies, travel, skiing. Some people, this is a high priority in their life. They crave this more than physical intimacy. I was sharing earlier how I've seen a lot of women's dating profiles. They're skiing, they're mountain biking, they're climbing mountains, they're skydiving. And I once connected with a woman locally, and this activities was her highest value. Now I'm all for doing activities, but it's not my highest value. It was a mismatch between us because I asked her, and she agreed. She needs a jock type of man in her life because this is such a passion. You see, here at Midlife, we want people that share our passions because we're not looking for roommates. We're not looking for a companion. We are actually looking for a partner. For most of us in midlife are actually looking for a play partner in the things that we're most passionate about to play together. This is why it's trying to fit a lot of square pegs in round holes kind of thing, because it's much harder for those of us in midlife. And let me tell you, any dating coach that says what you're doing is wrong, they're a crappy coach. I have to be careful because sometimes I do that too. So maybe I'm a crappy coach. But what I mean to say is, most dating coaches are encouraging you to compromise your life instead of finding someone who's aligned in your life. So if activities is one of your highest love languages, if it's one of your primary love language, then you have to find someone who meets that. Just because they might do acts of service, as Gary Chapman might say, might be a misalignment between the two of you. And activities falls into Gary Chapman's quality time, I would suspect. Number 2. Love language, appreciation. Emotionally, men and women want to be validated for their efforts. They want words. They want that expression of, I'm really grateful for you. I really appreciate your efforts. I can tell you a lot of women fail at this. Certainly men do as well. But I'm going to tell you, when I say fail, they are so weak in expressing validation and appreciation for efforts. Do you know men who go through divorce state that one of their number one disappointments is they didn't feel validated and appreciated for their efforts? I can speak from personal experience. That's how it was for me. And I know for many men, appreciation was rather lacking in their relationship. And so I want you to conscious before you go out on the next day, really lean into them for yourself. Number 3, emotional connection. You know, healthy expression of emotions. It's one of the primary reasons why women initiate divorce, because they're in relationship with emotionally constipated men, emotionally unavailable men, people that are avoidant attachment style. Remember, I talked about avoidant, whether they are fearful or dismissive avoidant. They lack that emotional maturity to be able to navigate, to be able to understand what they're feeling, and then be able to express it in a healthy way. If you haven't read the book, Emotional Intimacy by Robert Masters, I highly recommend checking this out. Emotionally healthy people are craving emotional connection. This is one of the fundamental aspects of a relationship, is your capacity to navigate your fears, your insecurities, your limiting beliefs, your doubts, your judgments, negative judgments for another, how your actions affect another human being. This is all in the context of self-awareness. And sadly, we have a population, at least here in the United States, that is rather robotic, rather transactional, because we're supposed to climb to the highest room of the tallest tower. That's what men are supposed to do. And that proves their worth. You know, the capacity to speak on an emotional level should be a lot more valuable than whether a man or woman take you out to a nice dinner and entertain you. I've always said romance should be reserved as a gift of being in a relationship, not as an entry point into a relationship. Number 4, financial. You know, it's interesting. That's a love language, is that capacity to support one another. You know, but here's an interesting thing I've noticed within men. I have a dear friend of mine. He's incredibly wealthy, north of $50 million. And he was telling me the story. He's now engaged, but he was telling the story about one of his early dates with his now fiance. How she went up and paid for the dinner behind his back because she wanted to express appreciation. And while the appreciation, but she put her money where her mouth is. I will tell you by the way, he happens to be rich, so he covers the entire relationship. But most divorced men feel a sense of pain on a financial level, and a woman and men contributing on a co-creative basis actually demonstrates partnership skills. And I can tell you, a lot of men, unless they're really tied into their ego, their machismo ego, they want a partner who will, both men and women want people to put their money where their mouth is to some degree. And that's just my interpretation of the financial love language. Now, the next one, number 5, is intellectual. You know, emotionally healthy people have curiosity beyond, how's your day going? Did you have a good day? I hope you had a good day. I know for myself, my passions are philosophy, psychology, human behavior, and spirituality. That's where my playground is. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the term sapiosexual, I can tell you that there are people out there that truly get off on literally almost on a sexual level when they're in the presence of someone where they can explore their curiosities in life. That's what it means to be an intellectual person, is to be curious beyond the surface. It's about being curious about emotions. It's about being curious about things instead of just experiencing life. Now, the 6th love language in these 7 love languages I'm sharing certainly is the physical, but I'm going to tell you a story. That is, physical doesn't have to be sex. I was on a date 5 or 6 years ago with a woman, and we were sitting at a bar, so we were actually turned face to each other, and my arm was at the bar, and I didn't notice at one point, she was just doing this she was just touching me. It was kind of fascinating to me. We were Facebook friends, so she wasn't a total stranger. And I was like, I didn't notice at first. It was so subtle, I wasn't even paying attention. But when I finally noticed, I was like, wow, I appreciate this physical touch. And I remember I was out to have drinks with a dear friend of mine, Tammy, and I introduced her to a dear friend of mine, Dawn. And she did the exact same thing. It was just an unconscious, involuntary type of move. But I can tell you that simple physical touch is what we crave as much as we crave sexual intimacy as well. Now, the last one is going to be centered around what Gary Chapman calls the acts of service, but this is the practical components in a life. This is something where you're actually working as a team together. Maybe one person does the shopping and one person takes out the trash. It's those practical things in life that build. By the way, being good roommates with one another is hugely important for the success of a relationship. If you have that capacity to work well as a team, and not necessarily it's always one person doing more than the other. It's about doing it in a co-creative, collaborative type of experience. And this is known as the practical love language, or at least my interpretation of all this. Emotionally healthy men and women want physical intimacy. There's no doubt about it. But quite frankly, emotionally healthy men and women want these 7 love languages of activities, about appreciation, about emotional connection, about financial connection, about intellectual connection, physical connection, certainly, and lastly, the practical needs in life. And when you're experiencing that, most of the time, these are the relationships, are the juicy, delicious, healthy, happy relationships I talk about so frequently on my videos. Is this sinking in? Is this resonating with you? Please let me know. If it is, post a comment below. I'd like to hear your thoughts. As always, if you find value in my videos, please hit that like button. Please share this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell so you can be notified of new videos. And also make sure that you hit it on your phone as well. Also, if you want to connect with me directly, there's links below to schedule a discovery call with me to see if working with a coach is right for you. There's a link to join my group called Midlife Love Mastery, where you can have direct access to me on a regular basis. There's a link to follow me on Instagram to get my dating vows, and all the books I recommend are listed in the show notes. All right, those who know my live format know it's time for Q&A. If you have a question, there's a little chat box in the corner. Write the word question, then post the question thereafter. Or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. All the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Asley. That's a picture of him right there. He's my son who passed away over 6 years ago. God, it's been over 6.5 years. Hard to believe. In his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process, Insight Institute, and scholarships to coaching as well. And so our goal today is $50. I'd appreciate some love for the Connor Asley Scholarship Fund to start off the new year. Also, if you want to connect with me directly and get on the hot seat, I just posted a link there as well. Jahala just pointed out the 7 love languages: activity, appreciation, practical, financial, physical, intellectual, and emotional. Yes, thank you so much. Paltry Flowers has a question. How do you feel about couples who keep breaking up and getting back together? I think they don't do a poor job of solving the problem that caused the endings. And they're probably insecurely attached to one another. And that insecure attachment reaches a boiling point, most likely. Then they end the relationship. One person does, the other person does. And then they get back together and do the cycle over and over again. Folks, I was in a relationship that the same thing. We were together on it. It was a 6-year relationship, on again, off again. By the way, I was a dating and relationship coach. She was a marriage and family therapist. By the way, I'm not here to profess that I'm any better at this than you. I'm just here to suggest that I'm here to promote personal development, self-help, and spiritual work. If you haven't read my book, what the heck is self-love anyway, a journey of personal development, self-help, and spiritual work. That's what I'm a big advocate, because dating and relationships trigger all of our shit, at least in my opinion anyway. Thank you for that question. I want to thank RM Bells for the $10 super sticker. Thank you for the love. I appreciate it. Janine, dating is like finding a job. Get out there. You know, to some degree, there is truth to that. It is like finding the right job. A lot of people are in the wrong job, but it's like finding the right job. You have to be mindful. You have to be mindful, because Jonathan, I'm just supposed to sit my feminine energy and just let a man claim me, because that's what all the feminine energy coaches tell me to do. Just be in my feminine energy. Well, first off, be in your empowered energy. It's not masculine or feminine to be in your empowered energy. Heal your childhood wounds and adult traumas. Adult traumas, the predominant adult trauma is divorce. And divorce is the unraveling of the tapestry of our life with another human being. And if we haven't healed that, we're just going to repeat patterns over and over and over again. And let go of this perception that men must climb to the highest room of the tallest tower to prove their worth. By the way, to some degree, it's that I'm bagging on that narrative because it's usually based on romance and entertainment, and not climb. And by the way, two people should climb to the highest room of the tallest tower with emotional maturity, shared values, and the capacity to blend lives together. That's the narrative I want to dive into. MMT. Oh, wait, I really want to share. VI Simmons says, great advice. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. MMT. If you found a woman who was amazing, would you marry her if she had small kids? I'll be candid with you. I'm not, it's just a lifestyle differential. You're talking about, how do I know she's an amazing person? Since I'll be candid with you. A lot of human beings are amazing, but that doesn't mean our lifestyles are compatible with one another. I'm going to say I'm beyond that space. I'm too old. I am too old to want to go backward in time. That's just not where I'm at. I want someone who can listen. I know the days in front of me are shorter than the days behind me. This is not about this person being amazing. This is about being aligned in our lifestyle. So while I appreciate the question, and I'm not discounting an amazing person, but we most likely have a gigantic obstacle because our time isn't going to be aligned with one another. And I don't even want grandkids right yet in my life. Maybe 15 years from now, I'll be ready for that, but I'm not ready for grandkids yet. Not to suggest I won't accept them, but I want a play partner for the next 5 to 15 years of my life. Somebody where it's all about us. Is that selfish? Folks, I feel as though I've gone 50 plus years without it. I want to spend the balance of my life with somebody that we can play together full time. That's just where I'm at. And by the way, a lot of men and women feel the same way. So please don't judge that. Sandy's in the house. After your last serious breakup, how are you opening your heart? I'm dealing with this now. Been very difficult to open my heart once again. Well, I'd like to think there's very little residue. There's not much of a charge from my last relationship. What's going to open my heart is somebody who speaks my love language, somebody who meets me on the 50-yard line. If somebody meets me on the 50-yard line and we have physical attraction for one another, we share the same values, our lifestyles are blendable, and they're emotionally mature, there's no reason why I shouldn't open my heart if we're experiencing all that. I'm just very selective as to who I will let into my heart. And by the way, ladies, this is just speaking for myself. I'm testing women because sadly, there are just as many broken women as there are broken men, and broken is a judgment. So please forgive me, but there's a lot of unconscious, unhealed women out there. And I just don't want to invest in somebody who hasn't done the healing work. I hope that answered your question. I'd love a follow-up to that, Sandy. Melanie's in your house. What are your thoughts on relationships which are probably enabling each other? Is it going through a recovery together possible? I believe relationships are the incubator for our individual healing. And oftentimes one or both people are enabling each other from usually a trauma bond experience. Doesn't necessarily mean they're capable of going the distance. There's going to have to be a lot of deep roots of trust built. But is it possible or plausible? Absolutely. But you have to want it. You have to really want to work and heal on yourself with a partner. It takes two people wanting to work on healing with each other. It's plausible, but highly unlikely. Anyone who wants to join the hot seat, I just posted a link right there. I'd love to get a conversation going. Sandy says, no, it's not selfish. I feel the same way. It's just how I feel about where I'm at in my life. It's just 15 years ago, it was a whole different ballgame. You know, my children were younger. And by the way, after losing my son, folks, I have a wound centered around children. It takes a lot for me to feel safe in that regard. It's really possibly a block to love for me, but I'm very aware of it. Okay. Oh, RM Bells has a question. I found on social media an old friend whom I love and have history with, but I'm not friends with. Has a sick friend and started a GoFundMe for them. I want to contribute, but hesitate. Well, why? I don't understand why you're hesitant. I want to contribute, but hesitate. If you want to do it, then I would invite you to identify what is the hesitation, what is the fear behind doing something that sounds to me like a really noble, kind, loving act. So ask yourself, you want to do this kind, loving act. What is the fear behind it? Identify the fear. If you identify the fear, RM Bells, then we can unpack that in this conversation, or you can join the love seat, okay? Okay, Sandy says, I agree with what you just said to me. I have become very selective. I also want a man who's done the work on himself and is healing, as I've done so much for myself. Yes, and it requires being radically, by the way, one of the things I teach in my private coaching is called radical honesty, pre-qualifying your prospect. This is asking those deeper questions early so you don't get too invested in the wrong person. Paula says, would you recommend widows date widows versus a divorced person? You know, I have mixed feelings on this one. I'll be candid with you. I have mixed feelings. Two widow, I mean, they each come from a place of understanding, but I'm going to share something with you. As a person who lost a child, I've gone on dates with women who lost a child, and I felt like their loss kind of overwhelmed my loss. It's just an experience I had. And certainly a child is different, but a spouse is so, if you were deeply in love with your spouse, man, that could be a lot to compete with. So if two people are in competing forces, I'm just here to express what I think could be some of the problems. Certainly, I don't have a recommendation one way or the other. I'm just aware of the question is how healed, how recent was the loss. I actually recently met a woman online. She had lost her husband 15 months ago. And she reached out to me and I said, are you really ready? And she said, no, I'm not really ready. She just wants to test the dating marketplace, and I'm fully ready for a relationship. I don't want to be part of her test drives. I want someone who's ready to go buy. Listen, I want someone who's ready to buy the shoes instead of going into the shoe store and trying them on. So I hope that helps, Paula. Great question. I really appreciate that. For the earlier question, I think it depends on how you feel about the children. Do you like them, enjoy them? Could you see yourself? See now, but you see, Nancy, you're misunderstanding this point, okay? If there's a lot of people that want to date empty nesters. So just because you meet someone that you might like, now this is where it gets tricky. If you feel lust or limits for that person, you're going to go after them full bore. And guess what happens? The children, by the way, no man or woman is going to say the children were the deal breaker. They're always going to lie and say it's something else. But I'm talking about, you see, you're making an assumption that you get far enough in the relationship where you actually feel that way. For most part, that's just kind of an upfront deal breaker. By the way, I'm speaking for the 50 and 60-year-old demographic. I can see women's profiles say to me, say all the time, I'm not looking to date a man with young children. And by the way, there's a lot of other complications that by the way, you folks aren't familiar with emotional incest, the drama and trauma that children can create in a relationship. You're basing your question on if you reached a state of love, but most people never get there because it's already a deal breaker. It's not in their must-haves. I'm just drawing attention to that. And you can judge a person for it, but everybody's entitled to what they want. Every human being is entitled to what they want. I just happen to know what I want, so I'm not in that space. Nancy Drews comes back and says, divorce versus widow, it depends upon the woman. How did he get divorced? How did he treat you? Yes, there's so many factors that play. That's why divorce and the ending of a relationship is the ending of the tapestry you had a life for one another. And also, if there's residue that carries over, this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of complications with dating today based on past relationships. So yes, I'm in full agreement. Miss Demetrius says, I butchered your name. How do you know a man is interested if he asked you out on a second date on the first date and doesn't chat? One-liners, nothing for weeks now. You know, you got to recognize that first dates oftentimes don't necessarily, unless there's absolute deep chemistry or there's a deep spark, a lot of times it's like, I like this person, but I just don't know. And sometimes on a first date, you might talk about a second date and then don't follow up because you might be talking to 3 other people. You might just not be into that person. Usually when 2 people like each other, they make time for each other. But again, first dates aren't always, see, when we used to live in environments where we're surrounded by people on a regular basis, it was easy to get to know one another. Today, you know, even 5 miles of distance can be problematic in the getting to know you phase of another human being. So how do you know he's interested? I mean, usually they want to spend time with you. That's the easiest way to know they want to be interested in you. When they're partially interested in you, that's where it gets kind of tricky. And I've experienced that. I've had some women, I like them, but, oh, I like her. Maybe I like her, but I like her, but like it's those buts that get in the way of actually building a relationship with someone. And it usually just means 2 people aren't aligned at this time in their lives. That's just my perception anyway. Janine says to Sherry, monogamy with dating or with sex? There's a difference. I absolutely will not have sex without monogamy and dating for at least 5 dates or so. You know, I'm the type of person that when I meet someone for the first time, it's a meeting. When I see them the second time, it's a follow-up meeting. And when I meet them the third time, that's a date. And if I see someone a 4th time, then I become dating them. And I like to date only one person at a time. It's just the way I operate. If I've seen someone 4 times and there's going to be a 5th time, then I prefer one person at a time. That's just the way I operate. That's not monogamy and exclusivity. It's just how I like to give my attention. Now, if I'm having physical intimacy with someone and it's going to be regular physical intimacy, I prefer both people be monogamous one another. Again, if there's regular intimacy, that there is monogamy, and these are agreements you make with one another. But this is just how I operate. You're welcome to operate however you see fit for yourself. By the way, I'd appreciate some love to the Connor Asley Scholarship Fund. Can you donate? Hey, if 10 of you donated $5 or $4 right now, we get to our goal of $50 tonight. So thank you so much. RM Bells is following up. Thank you for answering my question. I'm afraid because I feel guilty that I helped his marriage to end. I helped his marriage to end. I'm not sure he wants my name on a GoFundMe when my name may be mud in his book. Well, then don't do it, or go anonymously. By the way, I think you can do GoFundMe anonymously. But if you are active participant in the end of his marriage, that probably it's best to just separate from one another, because that just doesn't sound healthy based on what you just shared. So thank you so much. Adelina says, I'm 28 and he's 45. He is barely moving things forward. He was engaged, but it didn't work out. So there weren't meant to be. I don't think he even wants a real thing. He moves on sex and moves on. There wasn't a question there. I know you weren't offering a question, but I just did want to read it. Beach Lover just gave us a $5 super sticker. Thank you for the love. If 10 of you just donated $3.50, we get to our goal today. Jahila says, asking for a second date on a first date strikes me that he likes you. You have to ask yourself if you want to see him again. Here's the thing. That's not necessarily a guarantee. I've had circumstances where I've asked a woman on a second date because I was embarrassed this isn't healthy, but I was embarrassed to tell them I don't want to see them again. And then I came up with a dysfunctional excuse after the fact. It doesn't mean anything. By the way, I do agree. Ask yourself if you want to see him again. But just because he asked for a second date on the first date, unless they actually do the follow-up, it doesn't mean anything. So don't create meaning out of that, is my point. Monte Carlo says, married for 26 years now, divorced 9. I've worked on my healing and been on my best version. However, I'm a magnet for married men. I don't show interest to these men, but they find me. Well, I mean, if you're meeting them through an online dating source, well, it's just, why are you, well, I think you're not also including a lot of the men that you're not interested in that are single. You're focusing on the married men. But I mean, if it's, hey, listen, if 100 married men hit on you, then I would say there's a pattern. If 3 married men hit on you, that's not enough to create a pattern. That's my perception anyway. Janine says, Janine? Jonathan is a true gentleman and would be fortunate to find a man. We would be fortunate to find a man with his standards. He's exactly the gentleman type I require. Folks, there is such a misconception about me by many of you. Look at, I am riddled with insecurities and flaws. I make poor choices all the time. I do my best to be in integrity. That's one of my highest values for myself, is to be in integrity. But believe me, I'm not this perfect human being many of you espouse me to be. I just happen to be emotionally communicative, which is catnip to women. I get that, okay? But not every woman appreciates that. I'll be candid with you. A lot of women don't appreciate that because they're still in a different environment. But a lot of, just listen, I thank you. I am very grateful that you believe I'm a true gentleman. But believe me, I have done some radically stupid things as early as this week when it comes to my dating life. I have to ask myself, am I meant to be single for the rest of my life? Because it makes me a better coach for all of you. I'm actually exploring that thought if that's kind of a blessing and a curse. The blessing is I understand the dating marketplace so much better than my contemporaries who are married, but it's also a curse because maybe the universe just wants me to be a great teacher. And I accept that as part of my journey on this go around. Okay, thank you again. Melanie writes, I live an hour away and stay for days at a time, but my roommate doesn't allow him, even my unmarried children with boyfriend to spend the night. I'm renting a room in a house she's renting. My car is not working. Okay, thanks for sharing that. Adeline. Jonathan, what do we do about men who ask us women to come and visit them if they live outside of our state? I've had women come visit me. I'll be candid with you. I mean, what do you do about men who ask? Ask yourself, make them come to you first. Ask them to come to you first. Men are rather lazy. By the way, women are more apt to jump on an airplane to go visit someone than the other way around. I mean, I'm just being candid with you. But make him come to you, and then don't have sex and see what happens, or find a mutual place to meet each other. Gigi said Chandler on Friends would tell women, I'll call you. Wait, I'll call you, when he knew he didn't like them. The friends were trying to get him to stop. He never did stop. Yeah, it's hard to tell someone you're just not that into them. It's just hard. Okay, KH says, hello, Jonathan. I want to ask if you're safe from the fires. Okay, for those, I didn't talk about this, but for those that have stayed this long, really quickly, I live in an area called the South Bay, which is roughly about, even Santa Monica is in part of the South Bay. I live in the lower South Bay, and I'm about 20 miles from the fires. Now, there's another area where I live that could actually possibly have some issues, but where I live is by the ocean, relatively safe. There's just more moisture here. At least I live directly on the ocean kind of thing. So at this moment, we don't see any problems happening here, but thank you so much for asking. By the way, please hit that like button if you're finding value in what I share. Melanie asks everybody, hit that like button. Annika's in the house. How long do we stay engaged with someone on the app in the beginning if the communication is not consistent? I always have a rule of thumb that if you've had several text message exchanges, that it should move towards a phone call relatively quickly. It shouldn't go very far, much more than a few days at best, lead to a phone call. 1 or 2 phone calls should lead to a date, and none of that should take more than 3 weeks at the very most, in my opinion. Or just keep focusing on what you want, because the cream will rise to the top quickly. That's just my impression anyway. At least you're honest, Charlene says. Yeah, I am fairly honest. I try to be honest with myself more than anything. Question from V.I. Simmons. What does it mean that a man hasn't gotten over his ex-wife if he's occasionally call her his wife after being divorced for 3 years? It's funny. In not my last relationship, but the relationship before that, anytime I got mad, this is in my last relationship, anytime I got upset with my girlfriend, I would always call her my ex-wife's name. I think there's this subconscious, Freudian slip that happens. And it's kind of like a Freudian slip in my mind. Now, the thing is, there's always residue from our past relationships. It's hard not to have residue. So it's a very common experience that you might call someone your wife, especially depending on how long it's been. If it's only been a few years, that's probably more natural than those that it's been quite a few years. It's been over 19, roughly almost 17 years since my divorce. I don't think I still call her my ex-wife, but you know what? Sometimes I just call her by her first name because we're like family to one another. Annika just gave us a $5 super sticker. Thank you for the love. Hey, if 10 of you just donated $3 right now, we'd get to our goal of $50 tonight. Tim in Miranda says, if a man continues to prioritize, defend, help, show concern for everyone except his partner, but he denies that they are more important. You know, I believe we should treat our romantic relationships with the same importance of all our relationships in our lives. If we're having physical intimacy with someone, then it's equally as important as all relationships in your life. And that's just the way I view it. It's not about prioritizing, it's about making them as important as all the relationships in your life. But it takes time to build that trust too. It takes time to build that trust too. But that's just the way I operate. Adeline says, please give us signs of narcissistic sociopathic men we should avoid from our psychology and physical safety. You know, listen, if there was a way on a first date to predict this, I'd be a billionaire right now. I mean, you can see some of the clues by asking the radically honest questions that I teach in my private coaching, but it's not a guarantee. You're talking about a sophisticated, usually narcissists and sociopaths have a sophisticated emotional system that when I say sophisticated, the way they operate is so sophisticated, it's so hard to recognize. It takes a true expert to decipher that. I'm sorry, there's just no, I don't care. Listen, even Dr. Romney or Rami or whatever her name is, the leading expert on narcissists and sociopaths, I don't think she has a system to devise on a first date how to ferret someone out. Now, there are clues, but there's, you know, they're just some clues. But a lot of narcissists and sociopaths are so prepared for those clues that you might miss them if you're a lay person. That's just my opinion anyway. Melanie just gave us a $4 super sticker. Thank you for the love. By the way, if 10 people just gave us $4 more, we get to our goal. Sally wants to share with everyone, I crave sexual connection with a man for 7 years now, and it's not easy to find the one man who is only one to have sex with. I get it. You know, that's why a lot of people are doing hooking up, friends with benefits, situationships, casual relationships. That's the predominant relationships in the dating marketplace are hookups, friends with benefits, casual relationships, than they are serious relationships. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just here to say I understand how you might be feeling. Oh, Miss Margaret gave us NOK. I don't know what that stands for, but 25. I don't know what NOK is. It New Zealand, New Orleans. I'd like to know, but thank you for the love. I appreciate it. Tim and Miranda, he says he treats every woman the same, but the partner is the only one he treats differently. We've been together 14 years. I said I'd be happy with the same treatment that he gives others in his life. Well, that doesn't sound like a very co-creative relationship, but I could be missing it. Oh, Miss Margaret was Norway, so thank you so much for that. Nancy Drew. I noticed there is manipulation going on. Toxic people will try to manipulate you. That's a red flag. Absolutely. There is a lot of wounded human beings that are, whether intentionally or unintentionally, manipulating other people. Usually hurt people hurt other people. Janine says, I'd like to donate, but don't know how. In that little chat box, there's a little $sign somewhere, Janine. Just hit that $sign. That's a super sticker, super thanks. Thanks so much. Gigi says, narcissist red flag. A man has a lot of female friends. Could be his supply. Now, red flag, that could be a red flag. There's no doubt about it. But guess what? I have a lot of female friends professionally. Does that mean... You know, just remember a red flag means ask more questions. So it's not necessarily a guarantee, but it's certainly a strong sign of potential narcissism. But I happen to have most of the friends on my social media are women because that's who follow me. Laura White, question. What do you do when a man says something rude and then says that I'm just joking? Is that narcissistic? So I said something rude to a woman on a dating app the other day. It was a joke. Okay. It was because she kind of led with a joke. So I followed up with a joke that was a bad joke. Okay. And by the way, it was rude. There was no doubt it was rude. We human beings are flawed. We make mistakes. That's not necessarily, by the way, most human beings are self-centric anyways, but true narcissism is someone who can't apologize. So I did apologize. I said it was a joke. I apologized for it. Usually a person that was narcissistic has a very hard time apologizing for hurting someone else's feelings. So that's how you can kind of, I think, differentiate between the two. But saying something rude is a very common thing. I just did it 2 days ago with a woman. I thought she got my sense of humor. I have a bratty, warped sense of humor, and it doesn't land on everyone. RM Bells wants to let us know, I'd like to be on your love seat, but I can't speak freely where I live, and I'm a little ashamed to have my stuff on the interwebs. Maybe I have shame complex. There's nothing wrong with that. Opening yourself up is very vulnerable when you come on my hot seat, love seat. So it's very understandable, RM Bells. So thank you so much. Jean or Janine, J9 is the French way of spelling Jean. Jean is French for John. You know, the other is Janine. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, just correcting your name. Hey, folks, I'm getting wrapped up. It's the weekend. I'm going to go out and visit a friend right now. I want to thank you for all the love and support. Many of you written me asking about whether or not I was in the fire zone. I am not. So thank you for all of those that checked in. Thanks for those of you that donated tonight. I really appreciate that. Hey, if you found value in this conversation, post a comment below. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I do my best to read them all in the first 24 hours. As always, if you find value in my videos, please hit that like button. Please share this video. Please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you can be notified of new videos. And if you want to connect with me directly, there's links below to schedule a discovery call with me to see if working with a coach is right for you. There's a link to join my group called Midlife Love Mastery. There's a link to follow me on Instagram, and all the books I recommend, all listed below. All right, I'm going to wrap up this video as I always do. First off, give myself a big, gigantic Jonathan Barrick of self-love. I'm going to reach into the camera and give you a hug of love if that's okay. I'm going to ask you to turn to someone, a pet, a teddy bear, a pillow. Give it or them a hug of love, because hugs are a great source of love. And let's face it, we could all use more love in our lives. I want to thank everyone who donated. I also want to thank RM Bells, Miss Demetrius, Jerry, Janine, Lisa, Adeline, Jerry, Laura, Melanie, Miss Margaret, Tim and Miranda, Ava, V.I. Simmons, Sally, Annika's in the house. Thank you so much. Everyone, I appreciate all the love. Oh, wishing you all a super duper wonderful, fantastic day. Be well now. Thanks. Bye-bye now.